extra options in Excel 2013. Here we can see Excel 2013. Pivot tables work very similarly. We go to the Insert menu. Straight away, however, we can see that we have a couple of extra little bits. So for example here, not only can we go in and insert a pivot table, but we can also go directly in to recommended pivot tables. This is very handy. What it does is it has a look at your data, and when you click on this, it brings up a little dialog box called recommended pivot tables, and as I scroll down through this here, I can see some of the pivot tables that it thinks that you could use by going into this. So for example, I could choose this one here, which puts in the years, the grand totals, and the row labels. I can also go in here and choose something like this, and so on. So basically, I can go from one of the pre-built pivot tables, press OK, and it creates that for me. And you can see here it's summing it by quarter, and I can expand just the north by date. I can go in and expand the south by date, and so on. So that's quite handy, and they're called your recommended pivot tables. I'm going to go back into the Data tab, and I'm going to create an ordinary pivot table like we would have been doing in 2010, and it'll just show you how similar they are in 2013. So if I go to Insert and I choose Pivot Table, once again it'll ask me to make sure my range is correct and that I want it to go onto a new worksheet, and I press OK. On the far right I have my field list, and on the actual sheet then I have the area that it's going to build the report on. So here I have my filters, my columns, my rows, my values, and I'm just going to drag down like we would have done in 2013. I'm going to bring down product, I'm going to bring down the sum of the sales, and then I'm also going to bring down, for example, region on the left hand side. So we can see that it's building it exactly as it would have done in 2010. Couple of bits that are extra. The first one I want to show you is this thing here called an insert timeline. You can only use this for data that has a date field, and you can see if I go back into my raw data, I have a field here that's holding all of the different dates that the sales were made. So when I click here, what I can do is in the Analyze tab, in 2010 that was called Options tab. In 2013 they've changed it to the word Analyze. And instead of a slicer this time, I'm going to insert a timeline. And it looks in the list of your headings for which field would work best with a timeline, and it's come up with the date field. So I press OK. And what it will do is it's showing me now, if I widen this out here, we might see it a little bit better. What we're seeing here is a timeline, and it's going from 2012 January through to 2013 December, and that's the timeline of all of the dates inside of my data. And if I click on any one of those months, for example February, I am now only seeing the data that was valid for that particular month. So really what I'm seeing here are the sales that are valid for February 2013. If I click on Jan, hold down Control and go to Feb and March, or drag this little box here, you can see that I can highlight the section that I'm talking about, and now I can see only those valid entries coming in my pivot table. Currently this timeline has been seen in months. I can click here and go with years. So I can say only show me 2012 or 2013. I can go in and say quarters, so I can say Q1, Q2, and you can see every time I click on one of these, the values are changing here inside of the pivot table. And I can go into months, which is what we started with. I could do days, but because this is 2 years of data, days probably isn't an option for me here, so I'm going to stick with quarters, remembering that you can grab either side of this bar in order to create data with more than one of the quarters valid. So that's a nice little option there, and that's called a timeline. Once you've got the timeline selected, you can see up here now we've got timeline tools. So you have things like the name that's on the timeline, that's the name that's on the top here, or the caption. I can go in and I can choose a different color scheme for the timeline. And I could also decide whether I want to see headers, section labels, scroll bars, etc. So clicking on this little button here will clear the filter and it will show all of the data again. So that's a nice little timeline tool. Click on it there, press the delete button, gets rid of it off the screen. So if I go back into Analyze, that's that new little option there called Insert Timeline. You can see at any point that we can go into recommended pivot tables. So even when you have a pivot table drawn, you can still go in and choose from the recommended pivot tables as well. Pretty much everything else is the same as we would have seen in 2010, and you can see we still have our design tab, and that looks exactly the same as 2010. So within Analyze, really the only thing that you're going to come across as different is the Insert Timeline, and it's part of the slicer options in here.